I love that. Climate Misinformation Strategy Group sounds like that we're going to be specifically focused on spreading misinformation around the climate, which we're not. That's not the purpose of the group. But hello, everybody, and thank you, as Chris said, for joining us today. My name's John Brown. I head up an agency called Don't Cry Wolf, and I've been very lucky to be working with a wonderful bunch of people on this, what I think is quite an important strategy group, which I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on this call as to what we're sort of focused on, what some of the objectives are, a couple of the key milestones, and what we're kind of hoping to achieve over the course of this this year. But to start off, it will probably be worthwhile the people on this fabulous group to or some of the people on this fabulous group to introduce themselves as well, just so you know who we are, and so that I can share responsibility and blame if it all goes tits up. But Laura, would you want to start with introducing yourself?
Hello, I'm Laura Sutherland. I've been working with the group for a while now, and I'm very delighted to be involved in it. So I am a chartered PR consultant, and I run my own consultancy, Aura PR, based in Glasgow, and I've been involved with climate change and communication around it for a number of years, most notably for Scotland's 2020 climate group, which obviously has now disbanded. And this particular part of the work that we're doing has really sort of pricked my ears and really given, I suppose, like real focus to what our industry should be accountable for and where our roles and responsibilities should be. And I'm just really sort of pleased to be involved in it and to be doing some really good work on it.
Go on, Teela.
Thank you, John. So I'm Teela Clayton, and I'm a relative newbie to PR. So I'm a CIPR accredited practitioner, and I work at Intent Health for the amazing Jane Brearley, if any of you know her. But I have an education background, so I was a secondary English teacher for about 11 years, and then I did a master's in PR at the worst time possible over 2019, 2020. And just loved PR so much that I decided, rather than it being a hiatus from the classroom, that I would actually move into PR. I'm going to be following that up with a PhD. So I guess one of the reasons I'm in this group is because of my kind of academic background. I've co-authored a number of papers, and I'm currently looking at fear appraisals and COVID, which is really interesting, and it kind of links into the communication around the climate crisis. And I'm starting a practitioner academic community on Guild with Sarah Hawthorne as well. So thank you.
Awesome. Si, do you want to give a little intro to yourself?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Simon Francis. I'm a founder member of Campaign Collective. I'm based in Edinburgh. We've got colleagues around the rest of the country and in Geneva and Milan. And I was chair of the PRCA Council last year, and as such represent the PRCA on the Ad Net Zero steering group. So I've been involved in the formation of that and sort of trying to bridge a link between this group and what they're doing, and then other activities that the PRCA charity and not-for-profit group are also looking at.
Thanks, Si. And David.
Hey guys, thanks for, sorry I was a few minutes late too, John. No, it's great to be here. My name's
David. Noted, David.
I got to demerit. David Gallagher, I work for Omnicom PR group. I'm the token American on the team. I do have a book in development on misinformation, and I've been following the topic, obviously, like we all have, with interest. And my main entree into this actually has been on vaccine misinformation. And as John and I and Laura and I have communicated, connected on, corresponded, I think there's an overlap between the anti-science movement that's affecting vaccine confidence is the same at play for climate change denial. So I think there's a lot of things for us to do together as a community. And John's modest, I want to say thanks, John, for pushing forward on this. It takes somebody to raise their hand and say, let's let's get together. We can do something better together than we can on our own. And I'm grateful for your leadership for pushing this forward.
That's very kind. Thank you. And of course, Koray has been an intrinsic part of this work as well. So Koray, thank you again from all of us for giving us the support and the attention that we needed, that I certainly crave within the PRCA as well. It's been tremendous to have the backing and the support. So thank you, mate.
Yeah.
Sorry, did someone just jump in with something? No? Okay. So what I thought I would sort of give a bit of an intro to really is like where this will kind of come from, and the sort of genesis of this. As we all know, I think we're probably entering into a really important decade, if you like, that is kind of being looked at from the perspective of a whole heap of things. We've kind of have had one of the most challenging years, I think, in living memory. We're entering the year of finally in the year of COP. We've got some pretty extraordinary issues to face or to tackle, and what we wanted to try and do is to sort of identify a way in which the industry could, I suppose, help ignite the right sorts of conversations and provide insight, education, some understanding as to what our role could be in specifically tackling some of the debates and the issues within the climate crisis. And I think it's important to highlight quite early on that, because I think it's one of the challenges that we initially faced, which was sort of, is this going to be this a sort of a wild sort of kind of Greta Thunberg-esque sort of tangent for the PRCA to go down. And I think it's important to initially highlight that one of the things that is spurring this on is not just the fact that misinformation might appear in the form of climate change denialism, but also that actually misinformation on if you like, the other side of the fence as well. So extreme climate alarmism is fueling an environment or a system where we don't think that the best stories, the best improvements, the progress that is genuinely actually being made by either organizations or practitioners or professionals is getting the right sort of breathing room and the breathing space. So this isn't just a one-way street of having a discussion around, why is it that there's still people out there that sort of deny that there's any form of climate crisis. Actually, there's also some responsibility and some examination to be done on the other side of things, which is how is also climate alarmism fueling a climate of fear for people to actually celebrate some of the great work that's already being done. So I think that's where this was born out from, was a kind of actually trying to have a reasonable forefront and clear conversation that was going to hopefully allow us to navigate and steer professionals and comms professionals towards a smart, succinct, open, and genuine debate and discussion. So that's where I think this was born out from. I think it's important to highlight that early on. I'm going to share my screen because there's a few slides that I'm just going to run through as well, just to add some context behind the group, its purpose, and some of its objectives, which will hopefully set the scene. So bear with me a second. Nod frantically if you can all see this. Yep, fantastic, good. Oh dear. So what is the purpose? So we've tried to be as succinct as possible. It's essentially to help UK comms professionals fight the spread of misinformation in relation to the climate crisis within the UK, and we've emphasised the UK bit quite frequently, very simply because there is a separate sort of working group or steering group that we are plugging into, but it's taking place at an eco level, so the ICCO level, that's going to be looking at this from a sort of global, more international perspective. This working group has sort of given itself a sort of parameters of focusing in on the UK. It is definitely focused on the comms professionals. Whilst I started with big, heady kind of views on how we're going to fundamentally change government and society through this working group, my far more intelligent and down-to-earth colleagues on the group said, well, perhaps let's just focus in on the industry that we actually know and are a part of before we start campaigning for anything particularly grand as that. So it is focused very much on the comms professional side of things, and it's to fight. There is a sort of sense of fight in there. So it's to fight that misinformation and the spread of misinformation by providing some sort of real clarity and practical advice, content and education behind the group. So in terms of some objectives that we want to kind of reach out with, we've kind of broken this down to 3 areas. So equip with knowledge, so trying to provide some useful insight and information around the debate and the role that comms and PR plays within it. We really do want this to be an area where we can celebrate success stories as well. Some of those unheard of stories that is hopefully going to propel others to either follow suit or to build on better. But we just feel that there's so much excellence taking place, not just across comms, but all of the places within which comms professionals work within, that sort of feels as though sometimes it can either be brushed aside or people are a little touch fearful to celebrate that. We actually want to shine a spotlight on really what's working. And we want to call out some of the challenges as well. This isn't an easy topic or an easy debate to navigate. So there's some challenges that we need to absolutely call out and showcase how we can improve and actually steer people towards an area where they feel as though they're getting the right information and the right access and the right tips and pointers to kind of navigate some of those challenges. So those are our key objectives. In terms of what we've done already, and just to sort of highlight the first step. So as you may well have seen, we put out a call for survey respondents to engage with an Opinium survey that went out, guys, I think about a month ago now, roughly, give or take a bit. And that was just to understand, what are comms professionals thinking and feeling around the debate, the climate crisis debate. How confident do they feel in engaging within it? Where they're seeing the challenges within their own organizations, either agency side, in-house, wherever it may be. And kind of to get us, I suppose, to take a kind of temperature of whether we're in a position of fear and uncertainty, in a place of confidence. Where's that sort of that gauge, and also to try and get I suppose a grip as to what's that level of knowledge currently within the industry, and where do we need to really sort of upskill or kind of improve our knowledge and understanding. So we did that one survey with the comms industry. We also complemented that with, I suppose, a sort of supplementary survey that went out to the general public to get a sort of national representative sample as well. So that then gives us this I guess this great benchmark of seeing where our as an industry, where our thoughts, feelings, fears, confidences lie and competencies lie, and how that compares to the general public, and to just sort of get a bit of an understanding as to as the UK, how are we feeling and thinking about the debate, and where's our understanding, where's our fears, and where are we more confident. Now that research is going to be made available on a dedicated website with some complementary content that will come from this working group, and some partners that we brought on board as well to add some context and some detail around that. And that's all due for launch next Tuesday. So we're going to go into a little bit more information on that in a moment, but that's the first thing that we are expecting to see as a sort of milestone, if you like, in the work that we've been doing so far. In terms of the other sort of milestones, if you like, the other objectives, so championing success. I mean, this right now, I would say this is the call, but on the 18th of May is perhaps the more official call, if you like, for content from the industry. So we are going to have a destination, a website, which all the details of which will be shared on the 18th of May, that we're going to curate content from across the industry, from comms professionals, but also from those that, if there are people out there who say you should be speaking to this person, this individual, you should be getting perspectives from these organizations, then this is absolutely what we want to hear. This working group wants to try and curate a great repository of information that we can then share, that we can all learn from, and that will be able to sort of act as a bit of a resource for people to dip in and out of. So I guess what the champion success thing is that really, really look into any fantastic case studies, any bits of work that people are deeply proud of that relates to either the climate crisis or solving an element of misinformation within that. Then I think we'd love to find out more, love to understand that, and actually be able to gather that content up and to share that across our channels, and to add that into that website, into that community. In terms of call out challenges, one of the things that we are looking to sort of end up with, if you like, as we go through this over the course of this year, are best practice guides. You know, hopefully we'll have a 1 or 2 that will be launching over the summer. And what this will be a mixture of is taking some of the excellent content that we're hopefully going to be getting shared from across the industry, taking some of the insight and research that we've already been gathering, and the continued research that we'll be gathering as well, and then converting those into some very, very applicable, very, very clear, practical guides into how comms professionals can engage in the climate crisis debate or discussion confidently, represent their organisations or themselves or well and effectively, and how they can navigate some of the challenges that occur. So those are the sort of the 3, I suppose, key areas that we're going to be focused on. So we've got that research, that insight, understanding piece that's going to be launched on the 18th of May. That call for content, we'll be gathering and curating what I hope will be some fantastic content from across the industry, and then converting all of that into some best practice guides, some knowledge guides that we can release. If I can just very briefly deep dive into the 18th of May, it's going to be a wonderful, fast-paced, sort of 45-minute, 1 hour Zoom call that is going to take place at about 1 p.m. I think, is that right, Cora? 1 p.m. on the 18th.
That's right.
Fantastic. We're going to launch our research. So just an Opinium is going to be joining us to just take us through some of the key findings, where it's pointing us, some of the observations that we've made. There's going to be an outstanding panel event as well that's going to be hosted by Laura. That is really going to sort of delve into some key issues. You know, where are we missing a mark when it comes to celebrating success? How do we get underrepresented voices into the climate crisis debate and make a call for that? How do we bring out some of the best in what we've been doing across the UK, and how do we alleviate some of the fears that might exist? All of that's going to be explored, and some of the key threads from that research is going to be explored in the panel event. And we're going to finally obviously reveal the website, that call for content. We're going to reveal the website and the process involved into submitting ideas, content, and collaborations on that day as well. So it's an hour of your time. I highly recommend you kind of join, get stuck in, get involved. Cora is going to be relentlessly sending out social media posts and emails right up until the point that you decide to register for the event. So please do get involved in that. I think it'll be an interesting opportunity to see where we've landed in terms of our first milestone. I guess just on a word on COP26. So we have put forward a strong submission for COP26 to deliver an event, albeit it may well now be very much a kind of mixture of sort of virtual and in-person events, depending on where COP26 lands. But it's focused on misinformation, comms, and the climate crisis, as you can imagine. It's looking to bring in some of the partners and some of the individuals that we've already been talking to. Obviously looking to be another platform for us to share research and understanding and insight, and some of these best practice guides. We are still waiting to hear whether our submission has been successful. But I just wanted to highlight that we have put forward a submission as the PRCA to be a part and parcel of what should be, hopefully, fingers crossed, an absolute milestone event in this entire debate. So that is hopefully a whistle-stop tour as to what our purpose is and what we've been up to so far, what you can hopefully look forward to next Tuesday, and some of our objectives over the course of the year. I think now would be a good time to sort of ask if there's any questions, any observations. If you want to ask the working group anything, then please, now is the time to do so. I'm going to have a sip of my drink now. Is everyone just weeping with joy?
There's no chat, is there?
None.
That was good, John. Thanks for that.
I was just going to.
Can I jump in with a question? It's Rob Metcalf, go ahead, Rob. Of Richmond and Towers. Oh, sorry, Corey. Yeah, okay. Interim chair of the PRCA Sustainability Group, as it happens. I was just going to ask how you decide what misinformation is in this context, and how do you then go on to police it if you see other PRCA members, for example, indulging in misinformation or representing a cause that actually strikes you as being misinformed?
So when we've not outlined an objective for us as a working group to police misinformation from PRCA members, there's already a PRCA charter which tackles, in my humble opinion, a quite a significant chunk of it tackles misrepresentation, lies, deceit, etc., etc. So the purpose of the working group is not to act as just a supplementary or complementary police force to the PRCA. It's very much a case of looking at, or I suppose turning to, and this is where the call for content is, and the partnerships that we're starting to forge is deeply important. It's looking at industry experts from across a range of industries, by the way, not just from the comms industry, but looking at ecologists from academia, etc., to help us define what we believe would be the best content. And a lot of it has to rest, it has to rest squarely on our shoulders. If we believe that something is best content, we're sharing it and it's best practice. Others may disagree, and we're prepared to fight our corner on that. Misinformation, how we've sort of defined this, and I suppose it's a clear definition between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is obviously how content is shared, perhaps by mistake as well. That is either false or misleading, whereas disinformation, that is done with malice and with a very clear purpose in mind, usually not a very nice purpose. So misinformation for us is kind of how do we look at examples and areas where content has been shared that perhaps creates either a climate of falsehood or is promoting a false cause, but it doesn't necessarily have to have malice or anger behind it. Sorry, does anyone from the panel, from a working group, want to chip in on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that next week, obviously, we'll have the opportunity to go in a little bit deeper into what our research has found from that perspective, because that's probably the more interesting part of what people have been able to talk about, and from Opinium's point of view as well, in terms of the and the level of responses we've had and what that might say. So I think obviously just now is kind of a bit more of a teaser as to what you can expect from next week's event, so we can get all of our ducks in a row, as they say. But yeah, there's there's quite a big focus on, from our perspective anyway, that our industry has a big role to play in this. And that again is about having wider conversations. I see Andy's asked a question about, is there any wider reference connecting misinformation with purpose wash and malpractice? And again, that's possibly something we'll come on to talk about next week, and what our research tells us from that perspective. But these are all parts of the conversations that we have to be able to address, whether it's in a positive way, if it's a challenge, John was talking about calling out challenges. These things will come up, and it's only kind of collaboratively together and using these best practices from people that have been through it in organizations or with clients, that we can work together to be that sort of better force for good, which we set out to be.
And I think it's probably worthwhile, again, highlighting, where we're hopefully going to be taking quite a balanced view on this. So I think there's, every organization or almost individual now is breathlessly trying to make sort of net carbon zero claims left, right. You can't move without another organization or individual making a claim of net carbon neutral by some point in the future. I think this is, without giving too much away, this is one of the areas that in territories that we want to explore, because I think it was something along the region of that there's been a sort of a 50-60% sort of increase in these sorts of claims being met, and yet only 7% of organisations are actually sort of reporting on them on any meaningful basis. So again, to Andy's points, and Andy, absolutely. For us, it's about, well, what would best practice look like there? Is there an argument to be said that if you're making a claim that says we will be, net neutral by 2030 or at some point in the future, then it's probably worthwhile keeping people updated on that journey as you do it. And here are the tools and the opportunities that you have to be able to do that effectively and communicate that effectively. As an example.
John, Vince Smithy, I lead sustainability communications for Europe, Middle East and Africa for IBM. are you going to go into any of the actual technical elements that makes up some of these statements? Because one of the things that we are looking at quite actively is how to educate our communicators in terms of what these terms mean, because
yes,
there's lots of complexity and you actually have to understand quite a bit beneath the covers to get beneath the sheen of these commitments and things. And actually, if we're not careful, we spend too long trying to analyze the data and not enough actually communicating or even starting a conversation. So I just wanted to kind of check.
If I could have planted you in the audience to ask that question, I would have, because it's a tremendously important question. And I think it almost alludes to what I was just talking about around sort of net zero and things like that. I think one of the things that we want to try and tackle head on is, does the comms industry face a challenge where it has a superficial understanding of buzzwords, terms, statements, what it means to have a carbon footprint, what a scope 1 versus a scope 3 emission looks like, things such as that? Is it superficial? And therefore, we need to actually root it in some evidence, some facts, some information to allow people to feel more confident about having that discussion. Or does that intelligence already exist and actually it's just not being communicated in the right way? And that's one of the key questions that I hope this working group will answer and will explore in depth, which is, do we actually need to take a step back and, outside of reading the odd Guardian headline or taking a look at something that was sort of shared on Reddit, our understanding of some of this complexity is fairly superficial and we need to build up that knowledge base? Or does it exist but we're just doing a poor job of communicating it? I anticipate it will be the former, and that we need to take a step back and actually explore some of the terms and some of the buzzwords that are kicking about and what it genuinely means to make some of these statements and to communicate things such as your carbon footprint, for example. And once that's done, it will be an opportunity for us then to build on that and to suggest this is the best way of communicating that. So yes, hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Vince, just to build on what John was saying there about providing practical educational advice. And one of the things we were quite clear on doing from the outset was partnering with organisations who are best placed to be able to deliver that information. And I know a couple of people have mentioned already that the event that's taking place next week, one of the panelists on there is a communications director at the Met Office, and they've been incredibly helpful and supportive. And fortunately, they have a vast number of resources which we'll be sharing with members and bringing to the attention of PR professionals. So where that information exists already, we'll be helping present it to PR professionals in a really digestible format so they can take the actions from it forward.
Absolutely, and I think we have a sort of couple of climate scientists who are feeding into this, just to provide even as simple as I mentioned, what is a scope 1 emission, what's a scope 2 emission, what's a scope 3 emission, this sorts of information, so that and what hopefully, if we get this right, what you'll see is these experts are the platforms from which the content is shared and generated. Our role as a working group is to make them to make that content accessible, approachable, to allow it to be kind of shared in a best way as possible for the industry. I see some couple of other questions here. So Michael, I think I highlighted very early on in this. We don't see this as we see this as a right and a left issue in terms of political leanings or things such as that. As I mentioned early on, there is misinformation taking place in both climate alarmism as well as denialism. Usually that has a fairly clear right and left cut territory as well. So we would want to be able to make sure that we're providing, at risk of sounding like New Labour or something like that, providing a fairly centrist view or centrist perspective of this, where we are trying to explore both sides of the conversation and the debate, and to try as far as we can to root this in a very clear and accessible way for everybody. So it's not a left-leaning stick with which to beat the right, if that makes sense. It's apolitical. Is that a thing, Laura? Is that a thing? I don't know. You have to correct my grammar all the time.
Yeah, I think that's the whole point of having a diverse team working on it as well. With different people that have got different experiences, whether it's through education, which is a big aspect of what we're going to focus on, or whether it's you know, actually in climate change and the ins and outs of having worked it with COP before as well. And you know, the sort of people we've been talking to along the way has really, I suppose it's helped us be more confident in our approach to this. We're not saying we have all the answers yet, absolutely not. I think that we've tried to do as we do in public relations, which starts off with research, then with planning, then with consultation, and from there that's how we can grow and help the industry be better at, yes, spotting misinformation and dealing with misinformation, calling out misinformation, but also having a much more positive approach. Because, you know, like John touched on it earlier, the sort of Greta effect of the alarmism and the fear, that might, you know, in public relations, we know that works with some people, but it doesn't wash with everybody. And our own industry, I would, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, I've worked in it for 20 years, but, you know, we all love to, you know, have our own, you know, our own sort of buzzwords, and we assume that everybody knows what we're talking about. And one of the things that John and I talked about way at the start was, do people even know what misinformation is? When we say it, or disinformation, what is the difference? And even those two very basic, you know, terms have to be established first before we can move on and really start to push on with the project. So I was just starting to write a response to Andy there, who was talking about better citizens or media citizens to be more discerning about misinformation. But I think, you know, we've got a job to do at home first, before we even start thinking about, you know, any sort of public facing campaigns. And that's one other thing that we talked about, was we've got a whole industry to tackle, which we're involved in, and we can help change with the help of the PRCA, ICCO, etc. And I think that should be the primary focus.
Yeah. Sorry,
John. Just a point on the right-left thing. Obviously, I mean, there's a lot of some of the trade union movement, for example, you know, are very against kind of what might be, you know, might be seen as steps to tackle climate change because of the impact on kind of people who work in certain industries and things like that. So absolutely, it is kind of, you know, an issue that isn't just, you know, kind of right and left, and communicators are working on all sides of that. And, you know, I think for us, we have to sort of start, you know, absolutely going back to the earlier point, ensure we are clear on our own understanding of various issues, and also understanding the bias of where people are coming from. Again, sort of debates around kind of energy efficiency of housing, you know, that gets tied up in transition to just net zero. And, you know, if you phase coal out of housing, then what does that mean for people who live in rural areas and things like that? So there's a lot of complexities which I think have come through as a result of the research that hopefully we'll hear more about in a sort of quantifiable way, to understand sort of the varying challenges and pressures that are being put on communicators to not only understand but then communicate points of view in an effective and measurable way.
Brilliant. Yes, so I think you know, as just to emphasise before, in case anyone else had a sort of similar vein on what Andy mentioned in the chat, this isn't going to be a public campaign, or it's as such. This is, I mean, the website will be accessible for all. So if people want to come and engage with the content, fantastic, delighted. But we're not. We're starting with a parameter of let's try and work into.
A lot of different organizations have perhaps different statistical methodologies, different assumptions that they're making about rates of uptake of technology, availability of funding, etc. I don't know whether you and the rest of the team have had much of a think about that, but that's I think probably one of the most difficult areas in that sort of misinformation, or I'd probably kind of call it sort of finding common ground. So is there a kind of an understanding of technologies and their application? I just wondered if that's something you'd had a bit of a think about, because that's I think where a lot of the debate comes about in that sort of future looking area.
So Rob, I think this is a fantastic thread and an area as well, because again, looking at this practically, I suppose there is misinformation and lack of understanding on, if you like, both sides of the fence here. I think there's organisations frustrated with and individuals frustrated with the fact that they've put in place or taken advantage of or invested in technologies and changes which they believe are having a genuine impact on tackling some of the issues within the climate crisis debate. And there are those that with just purely superficial knowledge, but a very loud platform, are potentially sort of batting that back down. And I think this is one of the things that we do absolutely want to, and you said a very good word or a very good phrase there, is what's the common ground here, and what needs to change in order for that common ground to be met. Where does the knowledge need to go up? Where does some of the rhetoric need to go down? And how can we best either investigate and then share best practice on that, or just highlight that from a content perspective?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So I'm working at Shell. We've got multiple carbon capture and storage projects in a number of different markets. This is a technology that's been around for decades. And we're already capturing millions of tons of CO2. But the number of media articles that appear saying, new technology, unproven technologies, it becomes very, very challenging and very, very difficult then to, highlight a technology which, bodies like the IEA point out are going to be critical in our fight to tackle global warming. It's tough.
Absolutely. So I think I am hoping that you will find that, Rob, that this is a useful exercise in bringing some clarity to some of that discussion that you are having, but also that there is an opportunity there to actually address some of this sort of quite head on as well. And I think from what I can gather, and this is a purely anecdotal, but from what I see, it is a small amount of upskilling in knowledge that leads to a better understanding of some of these bigger debates. Because people are usually because we tend to have a fairly superficial view sometimes of some of this discussion, and it's only when you reveal some of what's beneath the surface, I think people are immediately start to get more on board with having a more positive discussion, which is kind of what we're aiming for with this.
Totally agree.
And yes, Laura, all of these questions, basically, you've just got your panel event sorted now, haven't you? Because I think some of the panelists, Laura, that Laura's going to be speaking with, I'm thinking Martin and also Liberty from Green Element, will be really keen to get stuck into this discussion, because they have an incredibly practical, very sensible, very informed view.
I think that's where the beauty of looking out with our own industry really works as well, the whole collaborative approach, because we're not looking inwards, because inwards we can just find the usual stuff, and we have to look outwards. We have to speak to other industries and business to understand what we don't know, and what they've gone through and how they've managed to work things out. And these experts next week will be perfect to answer a lot of these questions even further.
So Daniela, around the question around how do we, the best, essentially the definition of misinformation. To Laura's earlier point, this is one of the first things that we've already identified as a sort of bit of a sneak reveal in the research, which is there are different interpretations of this. Now, we are never going to satisfy everybody with this, and that's okay. I have a long habit of upsetting random people, anyways. But we're not out to make sure that everybody feels very, very happy with absolutely everything, because that will be a fairly dull situation to find ourselves in. But what we will do is provide a clarity around what we believe misinformation is, so our definition, but also, and that will be based off of the research that we've conducted, and obviously, as Laura said, going outwardly and bringing in experts to help kind of solidify that position as well. Now, that might not be to everybody's taste, but it will certainly be clear as to how we're defining it and how we will then move forward.
That sounds really great, and I'm looking forward to seeing more about some of the definitions. I know that this is something we've been doing some work on in APCO at the moment, and it's really, really problematic when it comes to the definitions, because just when you think you've got a really good one, you see something else that feels like it's actually undermining kind of other best practices. So yeah, be really interested to see that, and also I think thinking about how this works in terms of kind of, is misinformation something that's sort of bounded by nature? So is it bounded by time, or is it something that actually changes over time as well? So for example, in the case of the COVID pandemic, were people who are health experts originally saying that masks don't work? Is that now misinformation, or is it not misinformation because that was the best expert advice at the time? So yeah, super complex, and but really, really, really interesting topic for us to be tackling.
Fantastic. Some great set of questions there, actually, which hopefully we will do our level best to provide at least the perspective that we have based on the work that we've been doing in the coming weeks. Well, I think that feels like a useful moment to just sort of close things up. So Cora, you've shared a booking link, is that right, for the panel event for next week already in the chat?
Yeah, it's in the chat box now.
So hopefully you're seeing a flurry of people desperate to sign up for this as well. But just keep an eye on the PRCA channels as we share more information on this and provide the links to the events, etc. Thank you all very much for attending today and for your participation, questions. We are always very, very keen on hearing from people from perspectives and different views, so that we make sure that we will make sure that we're as accessible as possible as we progress through this. We're going to get some things wrong, we're going to get some things right, but we are going to do our very level best to provide something useful throughout the course of the year. So thank you very, very much for your time and for your efforts. Thank you to the working group guys for all the work thus far, and look forward to seeing where we go.